Well, welcome to this virtual program entitled The Demise of the Warlord, a new interpretation of David and Bathsheba in light of an Amorite and Akkadian Topos, which is being hosted by the UCLA Alan D. Levy Center for Jewish Studies. I really like to thank today, especially all of you who are staying socially distant and but yet intellectually engaged by joining us for these kind of virtual events. And I also want to thank the Levy Center staff, particularly Chelsea White, but also David Wu for his technical assistance, for making the arrangements for these events. Today, we're really privileged to have one of the premier scholars in Europe, Professor Daniel Bodi, who is the professor of the history of religions of antiquity at the University of Paris, where he teaches a Hebrew Bible in light of comparative Mesopotamian religion, introduction to Akkadian, biblical Hebrew, and the fate of women in the ancient Near East. He holds several degrees from American and French universities, including a PhD from Union Theological Seminary in New York, a THD from the University of Strasbourg, and a habilitation from the Sorbonne University in Paris. He has 4 very fascinating monographs dealing with David's 4 wives, and we're going to look at one of them today. But he deals with David's 4 wives, Michal, Abigail, Bathsheba, and Abishag. In the first monograph entitled the Michal Affair from Zimri-Lim to the Rabbis, he shows how the documents stemming from the Amorite chieftain Zimri-Lim, who had to elaborate on matrimonial policy with his daughters, whom he used for political exchange, money, essentially. He could, and these enlighten us for understanding the transaction between David and Saul, who offered both Merab and Michal for wives and then gave them to other men. So a very interesting monograph. Then his second monograph is called The Demise of the Warlord, a look at the David story, which was published in 2010. We're going to look at that today. Really fascinating story where he analyzes the David and Bathsheba story in light of the Akkadian literary topos. Then he has a third monograph, which he edited, entitled Abigail, the Role of the Wife of David and Other Oriental Women. And he has a series of articles in that edited monograph comparing David and Abigail with a historical analogy from Mari. And then he has a 4th monograph that's just coming out now called Beyond the Hot Water Bottle, Abishag as an Administrator in King David's Household, which is appearing with Sheffield Press in 2021. All in all, when you look at Professor Bodi's scholarship, his use of Akkadian literature as one of the sources for his contextual and comparative studies is really impressive. It's certainly related to his teaching of Akkadian at Strasbourg University, which resulted in his actually published a grammar in French, Akkadian grammar for beginners. And another field of his research, which we're not touching on today, but very interesting, is his study of Hebrew literary traditions in the book of Ezekiel, Ezra, and Nehemiah in the 5th century, and his comparison with the Achikar Proverbs. All in all, his research contains chapters that deal with rabbinic exegesis, interpretations from the Talmud, Midrashim, as well as impressive parallels with Akkadian literature, and even touching on Greek literature, the scope of his scholarship is really impressive, and we are really fortunate to have Professor Bodi with us today. And I want you to welcome him and his presentation on the demise of the warlord. Thank you. Daniel.
Okay, so I'm going to present to you a paper dealing with the demise of the warlord, a new interpretation of the David Bathsheba story in light of an Akkadian topos. I'm presenting the outline. I will first mention 2 Samuel chapters 11, 12, where I assume that you know the David Bathsheba affair, and I will enumerate about 7 philological points between Akkadian texts and Hebrew, trying to buttress my hypothesis, my interpretation. Then we will turn first to Mari, Old Babylonian tablet, entitled by the editor Pierre Marello, La Vie Nomade, which means the nomadic life, where a sheikh scolds another sheikh who didn't want to join a military campaign, and he uses a very raunchy language, military kind of language. Then we'll turn to a very famous letter written by the great Shamshiadu, who is the father, an elderly father, who writes to his younger son, Yasmahadu, who is in Mari on the Euphrates, describing a victorious campaign by his older brother, Ishmedagan, who is on the Tigris river and lives there in Ekalatum. Then we will find a third example in the 9th century BCE Babylonian poem of Erra. There are about 10 lines called by Botero the warrior's manifesto. And then we'll go, fifth point will be the mention of some lines in the so-called Epic of Zimri-Lim, recently published by Michael Guichard from our Paris team of Assyriologists, where you find some examples, how does a warrior live? And then, if we have time, I would like to include a 1100 BCE incantation tablet where a woman at the moment of childbirth is compared to a chariot and to a warrior. It's really a battle. It's like there is so much blood that it reminds a battle scene, but also she's battling for the clan, giving birth and trying to survive and increasing the potential of the clan. Now, the narrative of David and Bathsheba in 2 Samuel 11, 12 will be placed in the context of this literary topos, which describes the behavior of nomadic warlords and Amorite tribal chieftains, as reflected in several Akkadian texts. The biblical story is interpreted in the light of an Akkadian literary topos depicting the ideal warlike existence of such a tribal chieftain. According to this topos, David's dallying with a woman, eating, drinking, and living in the shade. He had a long siesta, and then he offered, almost like a caterer, food to Uriah, whom he brought back from the battlefield, rather than leading armies himself into military exploits, would be considered unworthy of a warlord and disparaging to his reputation. And that has probably contributed to his son's revolt when Absalom revolted and declared that David was no longer apt to be the leader of Hebrew tribes. Now, you find in the Hebrew text, David sent his officers and army across the Jordan to Rabat Ammon to besiege it, while he, Yoshev, participle from Yashav, to dwell, to sit, Be Yerushalayim. you have in Akkadian text constantly sitting in a city, sitting under the tent, drinking, eating, sharing a couch with women. But the idea of washabum in Akkadian corresponds to yashab. Then David offered to Uriah shata to drink, corresponding to Akkadian shatum to drink, akal in Hebrew, Akkadian akalum. Then David lying with Bathsheba, shakav im, lie with, and two terms in Akkadian text, itulum and especially tsalalum, to lie with a woman sexually or share a couch with a woman. Then the mention of military campaign in the Hebrew text, you have Honim. Uriah says, my officers and fellow warriors are camping Honim, while in the Akkadian text, one of the sheikhs says, come and join our hen, our military camp, because our suzerain Zimri-Lim is going on a military campaign. And finally, in the second letter, when Shamshiadu describes to his young son what his older brother, who is his alter ego, and he's very proud of the older son, Ishme-Dagan, he lakadum, he captured the city, and he describes how he did it, like a case of a successful military campaign. And David is invited by Joab at the end, come over to Rabat Ammon and lakad, capture the city and make yourself a name. Otherwise, the conqueror, I will go down in history as the one who conquered the Rabat Ammon. Then you have David walking on the Gag Bet Hamelech, on the roof of the house of the king. And you have in Erra epic, being in the steppe and sleeping in a camp is better than terrace of a palace. So you have 7 terms found in both, which really shows that I have hit the nail. We are dealing with a literary topos. And you will see that I found some additional proof in Iliad on the other side of the Mediterranean. So this is, I'm going to give you the gist of 3 chapters in 35 minutes. If you want to have all the details and bibliography, you have to read those 3 chapters, but this is really the gist and the main novelty of this book. It's part of a longer work on 4 wives of David, Michal, Abigail, Bathsheba, and I just finished Abishag. The book is going to be ready for the this fall for the San Antonio SBL meeting. Now, this is the place, Mesopotamia. We are focusing on northern Mesopotamia, on the Euphrates. This is Mari, and now Zimri-Lim, who is fighting against the Adu clan, and it's quite, it can be compared to the house of Saul pitted against the house of David. Here in the Mari Amorite correspondence and letters, you have Shamshiadu and 3 generations fighting against the Zimri-Lim clan. Zimri-Lim is part of the northern Amorite, Semelite tribes, while Adu, they are more Benjaminites, southern tribes, and they are fighting for the control of this older city of Mari on the Euphrates, built by the Sumerians, but the semi-nomads dwell in it, and they are not very happy because they are not people who like living in a city. So now let's start with the first, and I'm just going to comment where I have underlined with red line. Zimri-Lim, now Hami Ishtamar, he's one warlord, and he's writing to Yasmahadu. This man is not the same as Yasmahadu, the son of Shamshiadu. He's just a warlord who wants to sit that campaign out. He doesn't want to join. So you will, before Zimri-Lim decided to go on a military campaign. You, Yasmahadu, however, plan to eat, akalam, to drink, shatam, and to lie down. And do not plan to come along with me. And he's trying to persuade him not to carry on this shameful behavior, but to join the military campaign. So it's really a quarrel between two warlords, Amorite warlords. To sit and to lie does not make you red-faced. You are not ashamed. Washabum et salalum. Salalum is to share the couch with a woman. This is the image of the tablet transcribed by Pierre Marello, who edited it. And he says, as for me, if I stay a single day sitting at home, inabitim, in Sumerian, which means atashab, the verb to dwell, to sit. And it's interesting, he's referring to his tent and he's using bitum, house, but it's really semi-nomadic warlords. So I suffocate. He cannot stay the day in a tent. Then he says, he's really insulting now. He says to the older sheikh who paid some flour, he supported the war effort, but didn't want to join. He didn't want to go and fight. He's insulting him. The scrotum with feminine second possessive suffix, which he's really turning him into a effeminate being. The scrotum you carry is not yours. And I tried to say that this is the Amorite way of saying you haven't got the balls to fight. This is why you want to sit this one out. And then the place, and this is really extremely raunchy language, and we're in a military setting. And the place where your father and mother saw your face after you fell out of a vulva, here a vulva received you. Basically, he tells this older sheikh, you spend your time in your tent, and the tents are divided. The compartment for the males, for men, and the compartment for women. And he says, basically, you spend your time between female thighs, and this is shameful. So we are into this Mediterranean honor and shame ideology, which Pete Rivers, an anthropologist, identified. The Fate of Shechem, everybody knows that book. And so he tells him, join us, stop procrastinating. Zimri-Lim is waiting for you. So now we turn to the second letter. And here on this slide, you get you see Mari, and you see at the right upper corner Shechna, which is Shubat Enlil. This is where the old Sheikh Shamshi-Adu, the father, who carved himself the realm of Upper Mesopotamia, and he's probably too old to manage all that large territory. He placed Ishme Dagan on Tigris in Ekalatum, which means palaces in plural, and his younger son in Mari. And in this letter, a famous letter, we knew in 1950, Dossin published it, and we knew the beginning. And then in 85, Jean-Marie Durand and Dominique Charpin, who is now the professor of Assyriology at Collège de France, they found a join, and they join those two pieces of the tablet, and we have the whole story. So in the first part, you get almost like a manual, textbook, how to besiege a city. And Shamshi-Adu, the father, he's very proud of Ishme Dagan. He says he went against the Turukians, and he repeats what he did. And then what I'm underlining, not approaching beyond a certain distance, less than 300 cubits, which is about 150 meters. Cubit is 45 or 50 centimeters. And there is a reason for that. When you besiege, if you get too close, at that time they already have this composite bow. You can kill a person at that distance, so you should keep away. And curiously, in our story of David, there is an exchange between Joab and David about a textbook case, what happened with another person in Judges who came too close and a woman smashed his head with a mill, piece of a grinding apparatus. And also Uriah is going to be betrayed by his officers and his general Joab by going too close, and then they will pull away and he's going to get killed. So it's really a major mistake in strategy when you besiege. And this is what the older Sheikh Shamshiadu, the father, is trying in an almost overbearing manner to teach the young son. And then this is the tablet with an upper part and lower part and a join, spelled with join and no, not T, because join, that's what you smoke. Join is when you put those two pieces of the cuneiform tablet together. And so he tells the main force of that land and the Turukians who gathered together with them, he captured. The verb ilkud lakadu in Akkadian. Not a single man escaped. He inflicted a huge defeat. Rejoice, your brother here inflicts a defeat to the enemy, and you there remain lying among women. This is shameful behavior. You should lead your armies. You should not stay with your favorite wives and concubines. And this Yasmahadu went down in history as a womanizer who was organizing banquets, consecrating stele, and there was a lot of sacrifices accompanying those consecration of those holy stones. And he tells him, when you march on your next military campaign, may you be a man, Lu Awilat, exactly what you find when David on his deathbed says to Solomon, now you be a man, which means be a virile, merciless. You're going to execute Joab and Shimei, those the one who cursed me with a vile curse. And also David asks Solomon, who is probably a young man, be a man, which means really have the courage to manage your realm as a real chief. And just as your brother made himself a great name, you too in the Katna pending campaign, make yourself a great name. Another major topos, you find it in Genesis, Abraham, God is going to make him a name. It's something which really goes and is found in other pieces of Akkadian literature like Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh makes himself a name by building the walls of the city of Uruk, and there you have that invitation at the beginning of the first tablet, at the end of the 11th tablet, when the flawed tablet was inserted, go and inspect the foundations and the walls of Uruk. And then he makes himself a name by building, by writing his exploits on a lapis lazuli tablet, and the reader is enjoined, go and find it and read about his exploits. And the third way of making oneself a name, it's the ale woman Shiduri. He tells him, stop roaming, find yourself a wife and get a progeny, because with the filial piety, that child is going to remember your name. So these are three options found. So this idea, make yourself a name, for the Amorites, it's a military exploit, having victories. We go to the third text, which is 9th century BCE, poem of Erra, and 5 tablets, 750 lines, and you get all the tablets deal with war, just the entire epic breeds war, destruction. Erra is the god of pestilence and war. But the beginning is very peaceful. What do you do in peacetime? Well, you make love until you, Isham, the lieutenant of Erra, rouse him. He will remain lying in his bedroom with Mami, the goddess, his consort. He will make love. And then Isham tells him the situation in the Mesopotamian cities is bad. They don't honor you properly, so go and destroy Babylon. Now, you get later what is called Warrior's Manifesto, the 7 redoubtable weapons of Erra. They are personified and designated as the Divine 7. And they are really unhappy because they are rusting. They want to fight. They were raging and holding their weapons aloft. They were saying to Erra, get up, stand up. Why do you sit in the city like a feeble old man who is sitting, not a warrior, washabu? How can you sit at home like a child? Children and old people, they sit. Are we to eat? Now, this is a typical. Are we, as soon as you mention a woman to the warrior, it's inappropriate for a virile, macho, Amorite. Oh, well, here, there are some ideas that even Erra is a bit influenced by some Amorite terms, but this is a literary topos. Are we to eat women's bread, akal, sinish, like one who has never marched on the battlefield? Should we wear and tremble as if we had no knowledge of battle? To go onto the battlefield is surely like a feast for young men. So whoever is really warmonger, he's going to tell, well, going to see your death, it's like going to a feast. This is really war propaganda. The one who sits in town, though he be a prince, will not be satiated with food. Ashib, again, washabu. And then his own people will vilify him and hold him in low esteem. How can he raise his hand against one who goes to the battlefield? However great the strength of the one who sits in town, how can he prevail over one who has been on the battlefield? The experience of war is superior to a peaceful urban life. City bread, though luxurious, cannot compare with campfire loaf. This is modest food, but it's better. However sweet, fine beer, it cannot compare with water from a water skin. Notice this is key thing. Water skin, warriors drink. They don't drink wine. They don't drink fermented beverage. And in Mesopotamia, women were fermenting cereals, and beer was really a female main occupation in taverns and probably at home. And here the contrast is between beer, finely made and sifted, produced by females, and water skin with water for warriors. A terraced palace cannot compare with the shelters of a camp. So again, this contrast. Now, we go to the description of the lifestyle of in the epic of Zimri-Lim when his appointed time arrived. So this is my suggestion. I'm trying hard to convince my Assyriology colleagues that this phrase, Adi Sha Ikshud Kashadu, reach, Hadan se Idanu, you get it in Aramaic, Idan, the appointed time. When the appointed time comes because they have done some consultations, he knows he's about to reconquer his territory, just like Idrimi also had to wait for the certain signs before he launched his campaign. And then he drank water from water skins. See, no beer, no wine. They have wine in northern Syria. He's drinking water from water skins. This is what warriors do. Tough life, no sophistication. And like a wild ass eating straw in the steppe, his men ate raw meat. There is a lot being written about those Amorites eating raw uncooked meat being as a symbol of savagery. But in fact, when you're on a military campaign, you don't have time even to light a fire and cook your meat. You eat it raw. You need strength to continue the march and the battle. So here it really epitomizes tough life of the warrior. And in this epic of Zimri-Lim, he epitomizes the true leader of his men. Now, this is interesting at our time when in my last book on Abishag as the administrator of King David's household, I tried to show that the idea of patriarchy generalized all over the ancient Near East is a bit simplistic, that occasionally women can be managers, and you find that in Assyria at Nuzi, but here you even get a woman compared to a chariot and to a warrior. And there is a logic to it. The most pertinent lines of this birth incantation, dating from 1100 BCE, is when she's giving birth. It's a very bloody situation, and she's compared, line 38, like a chariot. She's enveloped in the dust of battle. Like a warrior in the fray, she's cast down in her blood. So like Kuradu, like a warrior, she's contributing through her birth to strengthen the clan. She's giving birth, and they noticed that women at childbirth would die. Mortality rate was very high. In Europe, even in Middle Ages, at the time of Erasmus in Laus Stultitia, in his book on praise of folly, he says, folly is necessary, because if women were not affected by folly, they would stop giving birth, because they are dying like all the time. 16th century, he's realizing, and this is here the same realization, women must give birth, and it's a bloody business, and they are like warriors. They fight for us and for our clan, and they have the same status as warriors. So in childbirth, the woman is losing so much blood that she's likened to a warrior on the ground and bleeding. So imagine the situation that a woman is giving birth. It's a difficult birth, and someone is reading an incantation and invoking Marduk to help her. Finally, let's go back to 2 Samuel 11:12. The story of David and Bathsheba in chapter 11 is independent, originally independent. And then it has been included with chapter 12 by an inclusio. In 2 Samuel 11:11, you have Bnei Ammon, the initial words, the Ammonites. They went to fight the Bnei Ammon, the Ammonites, in Rabat Ammon across the Jordan. And at the end, 2 Samuel 12:26, you get Berabat Bnei Ammon, at the city of Rabat of the Ammonites. So those two terms show the reader, now you have to read those two originally independent episodes as a unity. So this has been done at a redactional level. So I'm not arguing that the entire story of the military campaign and Bathsheba affair were originally together. They were separate, because this inclusio shows it. And you find exactly the same in Gilgamesh, when around 1200 BCE, they included the visit of Gilgamesh to Utnapishtim, the sole survivor of the flood. The inclusio in the first tablet, invitation, go up on the wall of Uruk and walk around, survey the foundation platform, inspect the brickwork. And once the 11th tablet was included, at the end, the scribe added, Go up Urshanabi on the wall of Uruk and walk around, survey the foundation platform, inspect the brickwork. So we know that this is a secondary inclusion because the 11th tablet was taken from Atrahasis, the flood epic. It wasn't initially part of the Gilgamesh. The same thing happened with 2 Samuel 11:12. And now, as I'm reading Homer Iliad, right at the beginning, the wrath of Achilles, I found the mention of the same Topos. Book 1, line 225. Achilles is insulting Agamemnon, and because the priest of Apollo wants his daughter Chryseis back, and there was a plague, and it's a serious matter. The gods are angry against the Achaeans, and Agamemnon has to give Chryseis, whom he captured, back. But he wants Briseis, another captive who is in Achilles' tent. And this is what Achilles, the way he insults Agamemnon. You are a wineskin, not a water skin. You're a drunkard. Then dog-eyed, and the dog is insolent, treacherous, perfidious. And Helen says elsewhere, when she's struck by remorse, me bitch-eyed, who caused the death of the Trojans and of the Achaeans, Cunepidos. So it's an echo to Helen. And then heart of doe. And doe, that's not heart of a stag, of a buck, but you have a female animal. And the comment says this is a way of insulting him. But you find basically the same at 720 BCE on the other side of the Mediterranean. The same terms appear as an insult, and the female animal doe, heart of a doe, that's a way of saying you're not a true warrior. You're fake. In fact. So this is it. Now, basically, I've given you the gist of my my argument in this book, and we can open the discussion and you can ask questions.
Well, thank you, Daniel. That was really fascinating. Maybe I could ask you to unshare your screen now, and we could have a conversation here.
Stop share. Good.
Yes,
very good. I prefer to see you.
Yes. And hopefully we'll have you here at UCLA face to face in the near future.
I would be really more than happy.
Yeah, I think you spent some time in Los Angeles earlier in your career, many years.
Yes, I began at curiously at Fuller Theological Seminary because my background is evangelical, and then I went to Union Seminary. So in Europe, nobody reacts, but in America, people ask me, what happened in between? Did you lose your mind? You go from conservative evangelicals to the vanguard of American liberalism. So my answer is I wanted to know the whole gamut of American positions. If you don't know the conservative evangelicals, you don't know a big hunk of American society and the way they think. So
well, and then I look at your scholarship, and not only are you doing Assyriology, but your research includes very interesting inclusions of rabbinic materials, analysis of Midrash and Talmud. It's a very impressive array of scholarship that you bring.
Though there is a reason for this rabbinics. In order to survive, unfortunately, this is the sad reality. You may pursue studies and like them, but landing a good position, it's a tough thing. So I ended up, my first really appointed tenured position was at the Paris School of Oriental Studies at the Department of Hebrew and Jewish Studies. All my students were, almost 75% were Sephardic Jews and some Ashkenazi. So some of my students knew more about rabbinic commentaries than I did. And I had to find a teacher of Talmud to initiate me in order to be able to have the level of some of my yeshiva students. And this is how I discovered the valuable, well, how valuable it is to be able to access that literature. But in the meanwhile, I passed through Union, and at Columbia, I was lucky to have Moshe Held. And Moshe Held, in his classes, his method was, we know more than the rabbis because we have Assyriology and Semitic languages, but go and check the rabbis. They have an intuition, and we continue wondering, how in the world do they know that without Akkadian and without all those languages? And yet they have kept the memory of an interpretation which really comes sometimes really from ancient Near East.
Well, it's certainly reflected in the richness of your scholarship. Maybe I could ask you a couple questions. The parallels that you bring are really, really striking, quite striking, impressive. But they're also extremely diverse. So you have Mari in the early second millennium. You're using some Middle Assyrian laws. There's the nice parallels from the poem of Erra from the 9th century, which might be about contemporary with the early stories of David. And so I just wonder about the vector of transmission. How did biblical scribes come to know these things, or how do you imagine the way they were able to access this and use this kind of diverse material?
Yeah, okay. I had to address that question in my last work, in the fourth, Abishag as administrator of King David's household. I have a chapter where I'm trying, once I've gone through those 4 women of David, I was able to suggest Hebrew Fürstenspiegel, Hebrew mirror for the prince. And I'm arguing that my specialty is really comparative ancient Near Eastern literature. And I'm looking for literary topoi. And this is why also I had to go across the Mediterranean and read Homer in Odyssey, where I found 4 women on Ulysses, Odysseus's way back home to Ithaca, and each one has a role to play like a mirror. So when you deal with the culture hero in Hebrew, David, in Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh, in Greek tradition, Odysseus, they are larger than life. And their problem is, this is expressed, they are 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, like Gilgamesh, which means they are full of charisma, of strength, and they cannot understand there is a limit. And they have to hit their head against the wall or to meet a woman to learn something. And David with Bathsheba learned, he was at the peak of his power and glory, and he was warned, don't touch her. She is the wife of Uriah the Hittite, and she is the daughter of Eliam, who both are your officers, and he says, bring her over. And then this child will die, and David will spend fasting and praying and repenting. And at the end, when he sees his courtiers kind of whispering, he understood that the child is dead. And there he says a word. It's useless for me to go on fasting. I cannot bring that child back. I will go to meet him. He has realized his mortality and he repented. So the entire story of David here deconstructs the Amorite or Mediterranean hero worship. He has it all wrong, yet he continues with his story because he knew how to repent. So this is the novelty of the Hebrew dealing with the literary topos, which you find around. So I've come to the conclusion that probably those 4 stories of 4 women of David were part of mirror for a prince learning on the founder of the Davidic dynasty, his mistakes. You learn things to avoid. So with Abigail, he has to learn self-control. He wanted to massacre the entire Nabal farm and all the people. No, and this woman tells him, be careful, you're going to have a terrible vendetta of the Caleb clan. They're going to exterminate you the way you do. So he learns things through, and this is why I have found by that you do find first I'm arguing trying to show that what the Greeks share really comes from Mesopotamia. So that's a kind of a present tendency to show through the Hittites. Probably Mary Bashvara was from Hittites to Homer, that they were instrumental in bringing those stories. So through the bards and singers, for a couple of centuries, it was orally transmitted. So as far as David is concerned, 10th century, I'm not arguing for any literary tradition. You have to wait about 850, and this is the date you are suggesting when Hebrew is really popularized, you can write. And that brings me basically with the stories written down separately about those wives of David, 850, and then around 710 at the court of Hezekiah, there is scribal activity of putting that together, and that would be one of the sources of the Deuteronomistic history, and then there would be additions in Persian times. So I'm really spreading the composition, but I think I have found something which you find also. There is a Fürstenspiegel, Babylonian one in Mesopotamia, with some parallels, legal concerns, which you find in the Bathsheba story and elsewhere. So you will have to read that chapter. It's pretty dense. It took me a lot of work, but I think I might convince people that there is something in.
Well, I think it's a very compelling analysis, and you sort of answered all kinds of questions that I had in one longer response. I mean, when I think about your work and the way you're putting things together, you seem to be reinventing the whole idea of the Deuteronomistic history and the composition of the Deuteronomistic history, taking some elements of the older models and creating a newer model. Can you comment on how that sort of arose?
Yeah. Well, you see, I was struck by colleagues working on the Deuteronomistic history, being unable really to give a convincing explanation for those episodes with women. And they are not, well, for Michal, it's pretty short. It's 36 verses. But Abigail, there is an entire long chapter. And Bathsheba, again, a chapter. Well, Abishag, just less than 10, 15 verses, but nevertheless, there are some key terms. So John van Seters, he says the entire, what is he saying? The Bathsheba story is really the latest addition to the Deuteronomistic history. And it doesn't make sense. Sure, there are some terms that are from Persian times, like in Abigail, the feast, that you only find the feast to which Nabal is inviting his shearers. You find it in Esther. So yes, there are some redactional additions, but it's not so late. And with my parallel with the 4 women of Odysseus, and now I discovered to my great pleasure that classicists date Odyssey 720 BCE. And that's exactly the time when I am postulating Hezekiah's scribes were putting down the Hebrew version of the mirror for the prince to teach the young princes at the court what the errors to avoid on the example of the founder of the dynasty. So I'm,
Well,
I'm trying to make sense out of this
right. Yeah.
literature, suggesting I hope a probable explanation, but I'm very careful. You see, I read Mackenzie and his work on Deuteronomistic history and his work on David, and I found that his comments were close to mine. So I think, well, we will see how will colleagues respond.
Well, it resonates with me, of course, because it mirrors a lot of the general ideas that I had in how the Bible became a book, which was much more of a sociological, historical,
Yeah,
archaeological approach to the problem. And you've really given some fantastic literary analysis and data and
yeah,
comparisons that are very, very,
yeah.
very compelling. Um, Maybe I'll just conclude with our session and ask you one kind of general
Okay,
question.
okay.
I'm in more about how were you inspired? What was the research that inspired your choice of David's four wives as a topos?
Oh,
Because
this
it's a really fantastic thing, the way it has all come together. And I just was wondering, like,
yes.
what's the journey that led to this particular research?
Okay. Well, you see, uh, my my background is both French, European, and American, and um, the idea really is an American. It comes from Phyllis Treble. I was her assistant
Oh,
at Union, and she opened my eyes in her introduction to the Hebrew Bible. She said, when you open Genesis, the first theological conversation is between God and a woman. And, for me, that was a revelation.
hmm.
And I wrote a paper on Mikal. And, Phyllis Schreiber was very, very demanding. And she liked my paper. And so I said, if I manage to convince Phyllis Treble, well, I'm on the right track. And I just continued. But the first work really started at Union, and I just carried since another feature. For 13 years, I taught at that Paris School of Oriental Studies, and most of my students were just females. There are
Oh,
very few males. So I had to offer a subject which was appealing to them. And so it really, I guess the circumstances of my career and just, I picked up ideas as I as I
hmm.
studied.
Well,
And
it's an interesting observation here. I can't help but keep going on with this. It's very interesting. The role of women in, imparting wisdom. Of course,
yeah,
you have the famous,
yeah,
Lady Wisdom from Proverbs, but
yeah,
um, I think we underestimate that topos in the Hebrew Bible.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it also makes me wonder, what role might have there been for female scribes in ancient Israel? Were they at all involved in the formation of the Hebrew Bible?
Well, I think I'm mentioning in my fourth monograph. This is the opinion of Robson. I think she must be some British Assyriologist. She says
Eleanor
that
Robson, yeah.
very often um, the those who write are divinities, female divinities. And she says with this Torquil Jacobson approach, they project on the heavenly realm what is happening in society. So she concludes probably women were knowledgeable of writing. This is why they project goddesses who write.
Mhm.
And I found then some late examples. Greek, about 2nd century BCE, near Venice, Latin. In fact, you find a lot of ex voto written by females, which means that 2nd or 3rd century BCE, no, 2nd century, you find females writing Latin. Now we would need to talk more with the classicists to see we have something like this in Greece. but you know the story that Kohelet is maybe a female writer. So if someone finds some convincing argument, maybe we can revive that theory that at least one book in the Hebrew Bible is written by a female author.
Yeah, well, I do have a chapter in the book I'm writing now on female scribes in ancient Israel. So hopefully this has really gotten me thinking, and I have to thank you so much for this presentation. And we're gonna wrap it up here and with the recording, but we just really thank you for your presentation today, and we'll be putting it up in the coming days on the website and spreading it, disseminating in that way.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you really for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Yeah. So it's really great. I'm going to do a whole formal introduction for the video. So you'll have an introduction for the video, and the Center for Jewish Studies will put it together. So it was really nice to meet you. And I'm really thankful, I guess, also to my colleague, Aaron, who first sort of pointed me in your direction and said, "Oh, you really need to read Daniel Bodi's work." So it's really fantastic and really interesting, and got me thinking about all kinds of new directions in my own research. So I'm really grateful for this ability.
Well, also ending in Paris, it's a quite very intellectually very stimulating milieu with my Assyriology colleagues. So it's just it so happened. It's just
right.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll wrap
Thank
it
you.
up. But thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.